Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
What a save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rui Diaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nico Lodeiro leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region! Seattle Sounders is campeón! I've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Nice work on your little yacht thing.
And Portland can't say shit.
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder at Heart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Overcome seriously.
This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Welcome to another edition of Nos Adientes, brought to you by our good friends at Full Pull Wines and Body Spec, and of course our wonderful subscribers. This is being recorded on April 15th, and Jeremiah is currently down Mexico way, so I'm your host for this week, Aaron Campo, and my co-host for the day, making his second consecutive appearance on the show, is my dear friend Mark Kastner. Mark, how are you this evening?
Good. I think you can call me like the Sounder at Heart version of Danny Musovsky or something like that.
Well, I think that shortchanges you. Although, and we'll get into it. Maybe not anymore. I think you said it quite well in your story the day after the game. This was a very ordinary win, which is exactly what the Sounders needed. I thought the Sounders were pretty clearly the better team in this one, which you would expect given the talent differential. But it was a fairly boring 1-0 road win in April. And I think it's exactly the kind of result that can prevent a tailspin like we saw at the start of last season. And we've seen at times in the past where, you know, the Sounders were maybe not playing nearly as poorly as the results would indicate, but that sort of snowballs into bad vibes, bad performances, and then it does become a problem. I think this was exactly the kind of performance that you would want to see to arrest that sort of thing. Danny Musovsky scored the lone goal. It was a real poacher's putback off of Pedro de la Vega's screamer off the post. I actually thought a really nice goal from Musovsky because that thing was moving pretty fast as it came back into play. And then he almost had a second with a goal ruled offside in the 59th minute. But I think after the first goal, the Sounders still looked the more likely team to score. FC Dallas just was not getting anything going through that midfield. They were having to go direct, and I think the Sounders are always going to be pretty comfortable in a situation like that. After the offside goal was called back, it seemed like the Sounders were pretty content to just kind of sit back and see out the game. And I think for the first time maybe this season, they did so quite comfortably. There just weren't a lot of minutes that I was super concerned. It didn't really ever seem to me like FC Dallas was much of a threat at goal. The Sounders weren't much of a threat at goal after the hour mark either, but you don't have to be if you know you've got the lead and you're not worried about the opposition scoring. So very businesslike results, the kind that the Sounders I think kind of made a trademark for a lot of last season. And they've certainly had more entertaining performances this year, but it's really tough to argue with 3 points on the road.
Yeah, I think that, you know, like it's the kind of win you want to see when your team isn't playing well. Like, sure, it would be nice if all of a sudden, especially after the San Diego game, if they just kind of turned it on and played as well as they did against LAFC, and the rest is history. But in like a weird way, I feel more encouraged by a performance that just like wasn't very good. Like it's nothing to write home about. Hopefully it's forgettable, you know, like, you know, hopefully we're at a point in the season in November and December this year where we don't even remember that they beat Dallas on the road. It was just kind of like it happened. And I think that if you're trying to like start fresh, which the Sounders basically are because they crashed out of CONCACAF and league play has been pretty miserable so far. It's kind of a perfect place to start. Like, just go get the job done. The game didn't go, I think, the way that anybody had planned, kind of with kind of how choppy it was and stuff like that. And, you know, they were comfortably the better team. And that's why they just weren't playing very well, which is great.
Yeah, it's. I think that you're going to have a lot of games like this in MLS on the road, especially this time of year, right? Where it's just not coming together. You're not playing like anything to write home about. But good teams win those games. I think that there's this misconception that a lot of people have about other good teams in MLS that they don't watch week in and week out. That, well, those teams always look great. You know, they're always putting together really good performances, and it's just straight up not true. Like, this is a tough league to play in. It's a tough league to play in on the road, especially. Thank God, you know, if you can get Dallas away in April, I think that's a much better scenario than getting them in, you know, August for sure. But just, we've seen, you know, many times the Sounders playing a team that's not super great on the road and putting in a subpar performance and getting a point when they should have gotten 3, or coming away with nothing. And so I do think it speaks to the professionalism of the team to be able to see out a game like this, because they have looked shaky at times this year when under pressure defensively. And they just didn't have that to me. You know, it's like you said, it wasn't anything to write home about. They weren't playing anybody off the pitch, but they also did exactly what they needed to do. And I think, you know, at this point, I'll take that.
Yeah, it is funny. We keep saying it was nothing to write home about, and I had to write about it. So,
right. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. One last point I want to make. Like, it was a performance that kind of, like, this team finally looked like a Brian Spencer team. And I think, like, most of this year we've been kind of like, you know, some changes have happened, maybe not enough roster turnover, yada, 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 yada. But it just never really looked like it was like a Smetzer team that we've come to know. And like that Dallas performance was, like, how many times have we seen that exact same thing over the last, like, decade, basically?
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think you've got to walk before you can run. And I know that the Sounders were, I think, really intent on being more entertaining this year and switching some things up tactically. And I don't think there's any reason to think that stuff can't still be in the cards. I mean, they looked fantastic against LAFC when they were at full strength, right? So there's no reason to think that this kind of game has to be the norm and that the Sounders just can't be good unless they're playing this kind of game. But I think they have to be able to play this kind of game successfully. And they haven't really been able to do that yet this year against, you know, MLS level competition. I think if you want to contrast this game with the Charlotte game at home, right, the season opener, I think the Sounders were much more entertaining. They were much more threatening going forward, but they just looked completely disorganized in a way that's really not what you would expect to see from a Brian Schmetzer coach Sounders team. And it cost them, you know, a game that they definitely should have won. It cost them 2 points. So I think that getting back to basics until you can get some stability in the side is a pretty good approach.
Yeah, especially because they just haven't looked good on the road this year. Which outside of, like, let's say the second half against San Jose, but when you look at the game state of that situation, they were chasing the game, and it took them a really long time to equalize, even though they were, like, basically beating the brakes off of them. You know, that the Salt Lake game, they might as well have not even shown up. Like, that was that bad. The St. Louis City game comes after crashing out in Mexico, so that's kind of a compound situation. And yeah, so and then obviously the San Diego FC game, which was just, like, awful, you know, completely shooting yourself in the own foot, all that kind of thing. And Dallas, you know, I think a lot of kind of people in the Center at Heart Discord and stuff like that are making the point that Dallas is just not very good. And I agree. They might be the worst team we've played. Maybe, like I don't know where you really put that stuff in April, but it's still a game you have to like play. And Dallas made it super frustrating. They're a really physical team. There was 36 fouls in this game, which was just a ridiculous amount of fouls. And I'm not even going to kind of have the conversation about the referee. It just was a physical game. And that's just, it seems like how Dallas wants to play. I'm not really sure, but I just think like you play the 90 minutes that are in front of you. And I thought the Sounders did extraordinarily well to see out that 90 minutes and not really be threatened. It's not like Dallas had 3 or 4 chances that they should have scored. They didn't have any, I don't think.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think, and this is a good point to segue into one of the things I did want to talk about. One of the bullet points I had to talk about for this game was I did think the defense looked very solid in the sense that if Dallas was going to score, they were going to have to do something. It wasn't a game where the Sounders were making the kind of defensive mistakes they've made earlier this year that have cost them. And Dallas just wasn't capable of doing anything against this Sounders defense that was really well organized. And you could tell that they were probing and looking for those mistakes and trying to play pretty direct and trying to force guys into making mistakes, and they just didn't come. And I think that's a really encouraging sign, because if this defense can play up to 90% even of the level that we've come to expect from them, I think the Sounders can win a lot of games like this, even if the offense isn't clicking. So I thought that was really encouraging to see, especially because the Sounders have had some struggles with physical teams in the past. Like they have been straight up bullied at times in the past. I think the Cruz Azul away leg was a great example of the Sounders just not being up for a fight, and they got played off the pitch. And so I think them being able to stand up to a team that wanted to play really physically, and hold their own in a situation like that, and just not make those kind of uncharacteristic. I mean, I guess they haven't been uncharacteristic this season, right? That's been the problem. But historically uncharacteristic defensive mistakes, I thought was really, really encouraging.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that I've been kind of skeptical about as the Sounders have, it's not really a new formation. It's not that much different to how they played last year, but there are, I would say, significant tweaks, especially in build-up and in their final third and whatnot. And one thing that I've felt that's been lacking all season, despite both players playing pretty well most of the year, between Christian Roldan and Obed Vargas, is the midfield has just been left chasing. And I thought that Obed and Christian were phenomenal in this game. That's just like a partnership, and you can kind of really see how important that is for the defense to perform well, especially when Jackson Reagan goes off injured and Kim Keehee plays his first Sounders game in 6 years. So I think between Obed and Christian, they won 15 duels, which I don't know how it compares to the rest of the season, but it felt noticeably like they were the ones bowling the midfield.
Yeah, absolutely.
In previous games, San Diego, Cruz Azul, St. Louis, it felt like they were getting bullied. And that kind of, I think, gave them the platform for the defense to perform really well, but then you win the ball in better positions when the team is trying to attack, and you can kind of move the ball quicker. That's easier for your attack to get going. So I think if you want to call it the back 7 of the team, because Stephen Fry didn't really have to do anything. I think that they played really well, and a couple of players had to come into interesting positions. Kim Keehee is theoretically reliable. We don't really know what we're getting from a 35-year-old Kim Keehee, but in this match, he came in and he was just so calm and dealt with everything. I thought it was Nuhu's best game of the season, and I think you kind of saw. Paul Rothrock had to go play 8 different positions or something in this game.
Right.
And I just thought it was a really, really solid, and if you want to isolate, let's say that central back 5, the 2 midfielders and the 3 central defenders, I thought they performed really, really well as a unit.
Yeah, I agree. I thought I wouldn't say I was nervous about Kim Keehee But it's like you said, you don't really know what to expect. I mean, he's been recently playing at a high level, so I was optimistic, but to see him come in and not only play well, play really calmly, but just immediately jump into kind of taking a leadership role on the back line was super encouraging. And it's one of those things where the Sounders have a reputation for making Seattle a place guys want to be, and so it's really nice to be able to call out a favor like that and just say, hey, you had a good time. We could use another center back if you don't mind being more of a rotational guy. We'd love to have you. And I think this game is a great example of when that kind of thing really comes in handy. And I guess we do need to talk about the injuries. Danny Musovsky had to come out. Looks like most likely a cramps situation, I think, is the consensus. Reed Baker-Whiting, I think, same deal. The one that I think that's obviously the bigger concern is Jackson Reagan having to come out at halftime. Jackson has not been quite as good as he was last year, but I think he's still been very good. I think he's still, a clear starter on the team, one of the better defenders in the Western Conference. And so if he's out for any length of time, that's going to be a problem. And I haven't really heard any updates on his condition. Hopefully it's not very long, but having a guy like Kim Keehee that can step in is a pretty good position to be in. I heard that Jonathan Bell was training off to the side today. So another injury on the back line is certainly not good. But one of the nice things, I guess, if you want to, take a glass half full look at it about getting knocked out of the Champions League, is the Sounders only have one game a week for the foreseeable future until Leagues Cup, right? So hopefully those guys get a chance to get healthy and this doesn't turn into, a full-blown injury crisis. Even though it's April playing in Dallas, you're still going to get guys cramping up. So hopefully, nothing serious there. But I don't know if you've heard anything else or anything additional about injuries.
I have not. And the Jackson Reagan thing really bothers me, or worries me, I should say. If he's out long term, he is so important to how the Sounders build up in possession from the back that I think the handful of times he's been rotated or subbed out earlier this season, the Sounders just couldn't get the ball from the back to the front of the field. Yeah. And I really worry, I think you saw in the second half against Dallas, the Sounders didn't have Reagan on the field, Albert Rusnak, or Pedro de la Vega, or Jordan Morris. And those are I would say probably the four most important players the Sounders need on the field to move the ball in any meaningful way. And second half against Dallas, I thought they did okay. They did an okay job, especially through Danny Leyva, who we've been recording for 15, 16 minutes and we haven't mentioned his name yet. Who I thought played really, really well.
He did.
But if Reagan has to miss any significant time, I'm really nervous. He could probably play better defensively this year. And I know there's been kind of two mistakes that have led to goals that were he was at the scene of the crime, so to speak.
Right.
And, he could probably admit that himself, but I just would be really, really nervous if he had to miss any sort of time because there's nobody else on the roster that has that sort of deep vision with the ball that he does. Not just in terms of picking out long passes, but if I get the ball here, he's going to get the ball there. And then we're kind of through the press and stuff like that. So I'm worried, to say the least.
Jackson Reagan has the ability to break lines that MLS center backs just typically don't have, especially if they're as good at defending as he is. And, Kim Keehee, I always thought was a good passer that had pretty good vision, but he's not Jackson Reagan. He doesn't have that sort of ability to see the game a few steps ahead that Jackson has. So I think that's clearly the biggest concern, because I feel like you can put Kim Keehee in there, you can put even John Bell in there and feel pretty good about how things are going to go in your own end. It is how you're going to progress the ball, how you're going to build up, that I think is the bigger miss. And, I think if this is a hamstring injury similar to Jordan Morris's hamstring injury, it's not great. Obviously, you'd rather it just be a precautionary thing and he's out a game or two at most. But, if he misses a month even, I think you can weather that storm. I just really hope that's as severe as it is, because I think any more severe than that, it can become a pretty big problem.
Yeah, it should also be said that Stuart Hawkins it has been told to me, the ability to play that way. I'm going to be completely honest. I know this probably makes terrible listening for a podcast. I've never really seen him play meaningful minutes. Because I don't really pay attention to the MLS Next Pro stuff. So I would be in favor, based on like everything we've seen this season, right? Like we've seen John Bell play there. I never want to see John Bell and Nuhu on the same field, on the same team ever again. Just because I think you just are kind of like really hamstringing yourself in terms of like that deep buildup with those two players. And then we're finally kind of seeing this, like the way that this is supposed to play, kind of like the tweaks and stuff to the formation, like it's starting to work a little bit. And so I would like to see, like, okay, can we get 70% of Jackson Reagan in Stuart Hawkins? Sure, he's a young kid, but like you can kind of put some protections and stuff around him. I would so much rather have that than just a different play style. And I'm not sure, maybe Kim Keehee can do 70% of Jackson Reagan. But I'm not sure. I would be in favor of seeing somebody like Stuart Hawkins.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to play at some point, or he's got to go somewhere else for the rest of the year, I think. And it's a tough situation to put a kid like that in, to be like, all right, well, our guy who was arguably our most important player last year is hurt, so go out there and do that thing he does that pretty much nobody else in MLS is capable of doing. It's a big ask, but sometimes you gotta sink or swim, I guess. I do want to talk about a couple more positive things, move on from the injury stuff, because there's not much we can do about it. Let's talk about Pedro de la Vega. I thought he looked really good. I thought the Sounders looked much more dynamic with him. You could tell, this is another thing you kind of touched on in your recap. This is just his way of seeing the game, and his way of pressing the issue was something the Sounders have been missing, I think, since he's been out. So it was really good to see him back. I thought Danny Leyva did do a great job in the second half, playing a similar role. I would love to see, more Danny Leyva always. But I think PDLV being, if he can be at that level for the rest of the year, he's going to start looking like actually a pretty good signing after all. I think there's been a lot of skepticism, which I think some of which is valid, some of which is quite premature and unfair. But if that's the player the Sounders have, I think he's going to prove to be a really critical player. So I think that was really good to see, and I'm glad that they were able to get him off at 45 and they can kind of work him back more slowly. But I'm curious what you thought.
Yeah, I thought he was the reason why anything positive happened. In an attacking sense in the first half. He was in the right pockets. He was making the right movements, even when he wasn't getting the ball. He was in a similar way that and I'm not saying in the same way or at the same level yet, but just drawing a similarity, in the same way that Nico Lodeiro used to play, let's say in like 2017, 2018, in that kind of just like free role that he used to have. Like, even if he wasn't getting the ball, the defense was gravitating towards like where his position was, and that was opening things up for other players. And in particular, I thought that kind of like right triangle of Roldan, Kalani Renzi, and De La Vega was just so effective. I thought those three players have very complementary play styles, and in particular on the play where the goal ends up happening comes from winning a duel kind of deep, transitioning the ball forward pretty quickly up the left side of the field, coming across Pedro de la Vega, picking up a good pocket, and then kind of creating his own shot. It's a low percentage shot, but the fact that he can try something like that means you kind of shuffle the deck and reset everything after a shot like that, as we saw, because it goes off the post right to Danny's feet. He scores. So the Sounders have been really lacking a player that could do something like that. all season because he's been hurt. But I thought that was great. I was really kind of pleased with his first half performance. I was really pleased that he came off and the Sounders kind of saw it out. I was exceptionally pleased with how Danny Leyva played. And then also, like, to kind of use the golf analogy, like Spencer was able to keep some clubs in his bag. Like Jordan Morris was expected to start this game and he didn't play at all. And I think that just like one solidifies the confidence that the players that did play can do the job that the Sounders need them to do this season. But also too, it protected the health of 2 or 3 players that didn't have to come on. So.
Yeah. And that's, I think everybody in the back of everybody's mind, every Sounders fan's mind is always, this team looks really good, except if this guy gets hurt or this guy gets hurt or this guy gets hurt, it all kind of falls apart. So I think as careful as they can be getting these guys back into game shape and also figuring out, okay, how do we get by when this guy isn't around? Like the more time you have with PDLV off the field, you obviously don't want that ideally, but if you can get Danny Leyva some more minutes, playing that sort of creative role, and you have a better sense of who you are and what your identity is when Pedro needs a day off or he has another setback or something like that, I think that's definitely a positive.
Ready to kickstart your fitness journey? Whether you're an athlete, a fitness enthusiast, or just getting back into shape, BodySpec has you covered. For less than the price of a haircut, you can access DEXA scans, the world's most accurate body composition scan. Right now, we're offering an exclusive $10 discount on single scans, which brings the price down to $50. Just visit the site bodyspec.com/sounder@heart and use the code SOUNDER at checkout. The scans only take about 10 minutes and you get results in less than an hour. This is the same type of technology that top athletes around the world use to keep track of things like muscle mass and bone density. These types of scans traditionally cost more than twice as much. Although there are brick and mortar locations around the Puget Sound, they also have mobile facilities that visit gyms across the region. Just visit bodyspec.com/sounder@heart to get more information.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes Nos Arietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounder@heart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
Nos Arietes, admittedly, is not exactly known for our spicy takes, but that doesn't mean we want our food to be mild. Spice up your life with Haxan Ferments. Handcrafted in Georgetown and made with the best local ingredients from across the Pacific Northwest, they specialize in unique small batch fermented hot sauces and vinegars. Haxan Ferments brings bold flavors and natural fermentation together for something truly special. Whether you're a heat seeker or just looking to elevate your cooking, you'll find something you love at haxanferments.com. That's HAXANFERMENTS.com. And right now, if you use the code SOUNDER@heart, that's all one word, at checkout, you will get a free hot sauce with your order. Again, go to haxanferments.com, use the code SOUNDER@heart at checkout for a free hot sauce with your order. Haxan Ferments is a proud sponsor of the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network.
Last thing I had on the list that I want to talk about is Danny Musovski. So Danny Musovski put the ball in the net twice. His first goal I thought was a great goal, great poacher's goal. Second goal that was ruled offside, I think it was the correct call, but I think he was very narrowly offside, and I think just another really nice finish. And all of a sudden you look at his year overall, he only has one goal in the league, obviously, but his per night, that puts him at like a per 90 rate of like 0.5 goals per 90. He had the goal against Cruz Azul. I think it's time people kind of lighten up on the guy a little bit. I don't know. I mean, I've been a Danny Mazovsky defender for a while, so I'm sure that there are people saying, well, of course you're going to say that. But I think I think he looked really good against Dallas. I think when he's played striker, even when he wasn't putting the ball in the net, he was generally doing all the other stuff pretty well. He's a pretty solid physical presence. His hold up play is pretty good. His movement is pretty good. I mean, one of the frustrations I've had with the Sounders this season, and you mentioned it with Pedro de la Vega, and I've noticed it with Danny Mazovsky, is that when the attack isn't flowing the way they want it to, the off-ball movement is just non-existent. And so I really like that Danny can provide some of that. And obviously, I want Jordan Morris back and healthy and playing 90 minutes every week more than anything in the world. But I do think this idea that Danny Mazovsky is an irredeemable black hole that has got to be, can't play anymore. We should just bring up De Rosario so he can play because these minutes are just going to waste. I really think we can kind of put that idea to bed at this point.
Yeah, I really agree. I think one thing Jeremiah and I talked about last week was like the experiment to play Ferreira at the 9 just didn't really work. And it causes the attack to have to rethink and retool how it plays. What playing Danny does is it gets you towards that idea of like, we have store brand Jordan Morris up there. He's not as good as Jordan Morris, but he can do a lot of the similar things so that the other 10 people on the field can do the same things that they've been practicing all preseason and in training and all that. And I think it's great. I think that he played really well. I agree that kind of the criticisms of him have been harsh or at the very least misplaced. I think he at least provides that, like I said, store brand version of Jordan Morris, 60% Jordan Morris. And you can get the same ideas that you want on the field and he will find himself in the same place. He's not as fast. He's not as strong. He's maybe not as good of a finisher. However, he can do a lot of the similar things. And I think it gives you that, like, that same thing that we just talked about with De La Vega, where if he can kind of find a rhythm as a substitute or a spot starter and stuff this year, you can choose to kind of rest Jordan Morris in spots that you don't need him to play 90 minutes every game. And yeah, I thought like we're like 3-4 inches away from a brace. And it's funny for me to say because I am like, I hate analyzing offside goals because they just don't count. However, that's one of those situations, and in MLS, they don't have semi-automated offside lines. So we're just left to kind of wonder. Not left to wonder, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where like we're just a split second away and that's a goal. So, yeah, I thought he played great. And I think that that's just like a really important thing that like he knows he can do that, because there's going to be points in the rest of the season where he needs to be called upon. Something that like never came for Hebert was like, he just was missing. And like the stats nerd, the deeply asthmatic stats nerds like myself were like, no, he's actually good because look at all the positions he's getting into.
Right.
But he was never putting him in the net. Whereas like Danny is, or he's scored twice this year already. So like, there's at least like okay, this is something we can work with. Yeah. Now, if he doesn't score for the rest of the year, that's something else. But I think where we're at now, it's really nice.
I think the biggest thing for me is that I definitely think that signing another striker for this team is a priority. It's something I would really like them to do in the secondary window. But I think if you think we have to get an upgrade on Danny Mazovsky, we just have to get more out of that backup forward spot, which I think is a totally valid thing to think, right? You almost have to use that. You have to sign somebody who is like a veteran that you feel pretty confident you're going to get some contributions out of. I think if you feel okay with what you're getting from Danny Mazovsky as the primary backup striker, you can maybe take a bigger swing and a bigger risk on a U22 type player, right? Because the track record of those players, as I think we've talked about on every episode of this show so far this season, is spotty, right? Sometimes those guys come in and set the world on fire. Much more often, they do absolutely nothing their first year. But those are the guys that are exciting. They have the potential. And so I would love to sign a U22 striker. I think that would be a great use of the mechanism, a great use of the resources, a really good way to maximize, your potential future transfer return, all that good stuff. But I don't think you can use that signing on a player that you feel like you have to get an immediate contribution from. And so I think if you can get to a spot where you feel more comfortable with Danny Musovski getting, the lion's share of backup minutes at striker, that gives you a lot more options with what you can do in the summer window.
Yeah, I agree. I think, or in the next week, because we have until next Wednesday.
That's true.
I don't recommend anybody holding their breath.
Yeah.
I think that Craig Weibel kind of alluded to this when he did his media availability after the Ryan Kent signing, was like, hey, it is extremely difficult to sign an under 22 striker from, let's say, South America that has large upside, because those players, A, don't grow on trees, and B, are usually going in the double like tens of millions of dollars. So it's going to be, I think, tough to find that player. But I think if this kind of let's say, if these two strikers can work out until the summer, it gives them that opportunity to find a guy that they can be like, hey, here's the right price point. Here's he's at the right point in his career, and he's got the upside that we're looking for, that maybe in 2 or 3 seasons can kind of take over for Jordan Morris. So, I do want to see them swing for the fences. I think the annoying thing about the Leo Chu signing was it was kind of a safe U22 signing, and that just kind of sucked all around. And I don't want to do the Leo Chu striker electric boogaloo thing. I want to find a guy that is exciting. Maybe he sucks, but that's okay.
Yeah. I think what you hope for with signing a U22 striker is you hope to sign John Duran, right? You hope to sign that kind of player who has promise, but is too raw to really have a lot of buzz at top leagues. And then you strike gold and you sell them for a huge payday, and then you get another huge payday with a sell-on fee. That's I think, a great outcome, right? That's what you want, because you want that mechanism to make you money. You also want to, get a contribution from the guy, but ultimately I think this is a income generating mechanism. But you have to take a big risk to do that. And if you feel like we need this guy to contribute, you can't take that big risk. So I'm totally with you there. Well, I think that's a good place to call it. We are going to be back with some power rankings. You're listening to Nos Audietis. Welcome back to Nos Audietis. Mark, let's do some power rankings. I think our topic for the week is why we think this thing is going to turn around. It's a nice little counterpoint to last week. Why are things going so bad? Now we've got a win under our belts. So let's talk about some reasons we're optimistic. And the first one, I think, is a pretty obvious one, but we've seen it work a lot before. A good defense gets you really far in MLS.
Yeah, and I think we've talked a lot about how the Sounders have made some really stupid mistakes this season, but they at their core, they are a good defense. There's still maybe some question marks about potentially some players have kind of fallen off a cliff, but we don't know that yet. It's April. And I think that last season, everybody was kind of waiting for the Sounders to kind of break, sort of to use kind of a horse racing analogy, come around the final turn and then just kind of take off towards the finish line. They never really did that, but they did get to the Western Conference final at the same time. Right. So it's kind of well, if they can be just like a little bit better offensively this year and build on that like really elite defense that they have, hey, let's see where this thing goes. And yeah, things haven't really clicked in terms of the attack outside of like, let's say, one game this year, but the defense has made some stupid mistakes. But if they eliminate those, they'll be a really good defense. And like a good defense takes you really far in MLS. Like that's how the Red Bulls got to the final, was like they were a really good defensive team. They had a couple of lucky breaks here and there. And yeah, I think with the Sounders, we're now 5 or 6 years into like having one of the league's best defenses. So I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I think that it can be kind of frustrating, and it frustrates me as well. But the Sounders definitely have an approach of giving themselves the highest floor possible. And a big part of that is making sure your defensive house is in order. And I think, it's not maybe the most exciting approach in the world all the time, but I think it's hard to argue with the consistency and the results the Sounders have had, over the years. And I do think too that if you know that part of your game is going to be under control consistently year to year, it gives you a lot more flexibility to, experiment with things in the attack and maybe take some bigger swings on players from time to time. So yeah, I'm with you. I think that's a good reason for optimism. Next one up, the Western Conference is really shitty.
Yeah, I don't know if it's hard to watch a lot of MLS now because of how Apple TV has kind of changed the schedule, because when the Sounders are on, that's when pretty much the rest of the Western Conference is on. So, and I don't expect fans to be like, oh, I'm going to go rewatch 5 or 6 games from over the weekend. But look at the kind of standings of the Western Conference. Vancouver is in first and Minnesota United is in second. Personally, and I said this last week, I think Vancouver might be the best team in the world. So
they're really good, man.
That's something to kind of like wrap your head around. Like the little brother is finally like taller than you type of thing. Yeah. But like Minnesota United is not good. They are efficient at getting results, but that's not good. And then an expansion team is in third. So all of your kind of like heavy hitters in the Western Conference, LAFC, us, Seattle, the Galaxy, even kind of let's say the rung below that with like Salt Lake and maybe you can throw FC Dallas into that category too. We're all having bad starts. So, and I am of the opinion that some of the bigger heavy hitters like LAFC have deeper and more obvious flaws than the Sounders. LAFC do, I think, have 2 open DP spots for the summer, so that's something to keep in mind. But they choked again in CONCACAF this past week. They are like one crazy Gareth Bale goal away from just being that's the type of franchise they are. So I just don't, and they choked against us in the playoffs last year. So I'm not entirely worried about the Western Conference, that if the Sounders can kind of get their own house in order, they can put a run of games together and kind of by the end of the season find themselves not only in kind of that home playoff hosting position, but potentially like higher. I don't know. I don't really know how the Supporter Shield stuff is like going to shake out this season. It's just really weird. Plus the Sounders do unfortunately have to deal with Club World Cup. Those are literally games they have to play that other teams don't. So I don't know. Like they're 10 points back right now in the Supporter Shield standings. That's not an incredible amount of points in MLS. It's probably too much. And they're just, Jeremiah and I kind of talked about this last week. They're not really the type of club to want or try to win the Supporter Shield, but I think they could find themselves in a situation where like through league play, they find themselves qualified for CONCACAF again. That's for sure. So. Yeah.
I mean, I think Vancouver is for real. I think there's a lot of skepticism about that, but I talk sports with a decent number of Whitecaps supporters who have been Whitecap supporters for as long as the team has been in MLS. And they've had these hot starts before, and they have all to a person said this is a different team. This is fundamentally different soccer that they're playing. And so I think they have a legit shot at winning the Shield, which, you know what? I'm happy for them, man. They've put up with a lot of shit over the years. So Godspeed to the Caps. And I don't think we're catching them, but I don't think a top 3 finish is anywhere near out of the question. I think this team is good, and you know, they do this at the beginning of the season. I wish they didn't do it, but they do. And it's just kind of our lot in life. So yeah, I do think LAFC has some real problems. The Galaxy are dead and not coming back anytime soon. RSL is, I think, it's funny to say this about teams that are ahead of the Sounders in the table, but I just like, I can explain why the Sounders have struggled in ways that, and we're doing it right now, right, that give me optimism they'll be able to turn it around in ways that I can't really do that for LAFC or Salt Lake. Next one up, Pedro de la Vega seems like the one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we spent the last segment talking about how well he played in a game that in general the Sounders didn't play very well in, but I think he's quietly putting together like an early season resume of being like an extremely good signing. And
yeah,
the question obviously is the injuries, and you just have to see what time does with that, because you don't just like figure that out right away, but you can really, you see his quality. Like he struggled last season for sure. Not just with injuries, but I think like in terms of play. This season, completely different. I think if the Sounders signed him in January and this is a new player we got, and I'm not going to do the like a new signing thing, but he is an extremely good soccer player, and he is the thing that this whole thing was missing last season. And there are some better players around him in addition to that. So I think that there are blessings in kind of getting knocked out of CONCACAF. There are blessings in not having the Open Cup later in the season. I don't know what this Leagues Cup thing is, but I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist, because that's what I've done with Leagues Cup the entire time.
It's the right call, I think.
And then you kind of set aside Club World Cup, and you're in this kind of cadence where the Sounders are playing once a week, maybe a few midweek games here and there where they need to rotate. And I think he can find a rhythm, and he can kind of be a, like, let's say 15 to 20 goal contribution type player for the rest of the season, in addition to Rusnak already being that and Jordan Morris already being that. So,
yeah, I think when I think of what the best version of Pedro de la Vega looks like, and you kind of alluded to this in the last segment, it is Nico Lodeiro without the stuff that made Nico Lodeiro kind of a pain in the ass sometimes, right? Especially towards the end of Nico's run, where they do a lot of things similarly. They're very high energy players. They move off the ball. They thrive in kind of a freer role. But Nico demanded the ball in a way that Pedro doesn't seem to demand the ball. And when Nico was feeling it, that wasn't really a huge problem. But when he wasn't, or when the Sounders didn't have him, it was a big problem, because the entire thing just kind of became, we'll just give the ball to Nico and let him figure it out. And I just don't get the sense that Pedro is that kind of player, but he has that same level of energy. He likes to run. He likes to move off the ball. And he just likes to cause problems. And I don't think they're necessarily similar players. Like, Pedro is more of a dribbler than Nico was. He's
faster too.
He's faster. I think he's less of a. Nico was really, I think, more of a creator than Pedro was, or Pedro is. I think Pedro wants to create chances for himself, which is not a criticism. I love a guy that will take somebody on and try to make something happen. So I'm not saying that they are like identical types of players, but I think in terms of the impact they can have, That's kind of what I look at as the best potential outcome for Pedro. Best plausible potential outcome. Two more. The next one for me, I think, is the one that gives me the most optimism, although maybe it's not the most important. Brian Schmetzer tends to figure it out.
Yeah, I think like he just does this kind of thing. And I don't know. It's obvious. It's certainly not by design. I think, and he's not a insane person. And he's not like giving the rest of the league a head start type of thing. But I like, until he doesn't do this, and that probably comes when he finally retires, whenever that is. This is just, I think, gonna kind of be how things go. And I'm totally okay with it. I've made my peace a long time ago. I've accepted that like a game in April, an MLS game in April or March, like fundamentally doesn't matter in the same way as it does in September, or September, let's say. So I'm kind of okay if he's taking risks to kind of figure out what he needs to do with the roster so that when the games do actually matter, they matter, you know, and they're on the winning side of that, because that's typically what tends to happen. That is not a criticism of the Sounders. That is not a criticism of the coaching staff. That's not that's the league has done this on purpose. Like MLS has decided they are a league that crowns its champion via playoffs. And when you do that, you inherently devalue early season games. It's just how it works. And until that changes, which it never will, this is what's going to happen. And especially when they start putting funny business in the middle of the season, like the thing that I just said I'm going to ignore in Leagues Cup.
Yeah.
Games until September don't really matter. Sure. Like I would love for the Sounders to win another Supporter Shield, but that's more kind of like luck of the draw and just kind of being around for it to matter. Like I'm sure being a Columbus Crew supporter right now in the last few years has been fun and interesting. Same with FC Cincinnati. Those are teams built to win the Supporter Shield, and they come up short in the playoffs.
Right.
That like there's not a team that can do both. And maybe Miami is going to be different because, and they won the Supporter Shield last year and lost in the playoffs. So, and they have quite literally the best player to ever play the game ever. So until that changes, I'm fine with Schmetzer's taking the first 2 months of the season, feeling out his roster, feeling out his best selection, getting some bad beats here and there, and just being fine at the end of the season. Fine to good.
Right. And I'm definitely sympathetic to the position that I pay for season tickets, or I pay for, Apple TV Plus or whatever it is. I guess you don't have to pay for Apple TV Plus, but I pay for the MLS package, and it sucks to feel like half the season is a waste. And so I think that's a fair criticism, right? I think I am tired of feeling like the season doesn't start until half of the games I've paid for have already come and gone. But I do think there's a distinction between that and the team has to prioritize the Supporter Shield. And I know a lot of people say, well, the most fun season in Sounders history was 2014. I don't personally agree with that, but it's a personal subjective thing. So I think that's totally valid. I don't think it was winning the Shield necessarily that made that such a fun season. I think it was having Clint Dempsey and Obafemi Martins on the same team and winning a double, and also winning the first league trophy the team had ever won. And you just can't recreate that, right? Like, I think the Sounders...
That season also happened to be the most heartbreaking because of the Galaxy knocking the Sounders out of the playoffs off of like one of the most insane goals you'll see in MLS. So it's 6 of 1,
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Last one. And I think that even though the Brian Schmetzer figuring it out thing is, I think, the one that makes me most optimistic that the Sounders will ultimately be fine. I think this is the most important, and it's getting healthier.
Yeah, I think, the Sounders just had a really gritty win against FC Dallas in a match that Pedro de la Vega only played one half of, and Albert Rusnak and Jordan Morris didn't play at all for different reasons. So it's just that kind of thing where, like, if the Sounders can have a healthier roster than not, they're going to perform really well, because the way that this particular roster is constructed is to, like you said, have that very high floor. That's not the sexiest thing in the world. And I understand kind of the criticisms and the annoyance that comes with that, but the players already on the roster are getting healthier. Ryan Kent is an addition to this team as kind of a wild card. And I just think that, like, I'm going to say something that kind of contradicts something I said last week, and I will wear my contradictions on my sleeve. But, like, this is the benefit of keeping the band together for another season, where it's like, these guys are going to get healthier. They're going to be able to, like, gel quicker and be able to do the thing, hopefully. That's the reason why you do this kind of roster construction instead of blowing it up and signing 7 new players. So it's one win. I understand that. I get the kind of, like, literally 1 week ago, Jeremiah and I were kind of doomsdayers a little bit, but
right.
It like, that's how quickly things in MLS can change. It really is. Like, Vancouver could lose their next 2 games, and that could just be it. You know what I mean? So that's how quickly things can change.
Yeah, I mean, the Sounders win their next 2, Vancouver loses their next 2, and the Sounders are 4 points behind them. It can change that quickly. And yeah, I definitely think that you got to knock on wood whenever you're talking about health, right? Apparently Jordan was training off to the side again today. Doesn't sound like too much of a cause for concern, but it's always a fragile balance with any of this stuff. But eventually guys are going to get healthy and back to full strength. And, I think that the next, let's call it 6 weeks of games, are going to be pretty critical, I think, to determining what kind of season this is going to be. Really through the Portland game in mid-May. There's some winnable games here, and the Sounders just have to go out and win them. They've got Nashville at home this Saturday. That's a game I think that they should feel like it's not a must win, but they should feel like they've got to win that game, if that makes sense, if you understand the distinction. So it's, what's the major league streak? If you win 2, that's a start, and then you win 3, that's a winning streak. It'd be nice to go on a little bit of a streak here. So let's hope they can do that.
Yeah, and I think that, like, you don't need a lot of points in MLS. Like, the record amount of points is like whatever Miami did last year, and that was like low 70s.
Yeah.
That in kind of apply that to kind of like any of the major European leagues. That's a team that's like qualifying for Europa League. Right. In most leagues, like, for instance, like the Premier League, which is a very silly comparison, but it's just not a lot of points. So you find yourself in this situation as a fan where it's like, the Sounders got to win their next 6 games. They just got to do it. And that's just not true.
Right.
It wasn't true last season, and they almost got to the final. So it's like, well, okay, maybe it's not necessarily true, but it's definitely true for the vibes. So, and I'm somebody that thinks the vibes are incredibly important. That's what sports are for. Like, this is supposed to be fun. And if it's not fun, go do something else.
Yep.
And so the Sounders are in a situation where they have 3 extremely winnable games in their next 3.
Yep.
Winning 2 of them is good. Like, even if the third one is a loss, and then you get into a stretch of 3 games where it's kind of a nightmare because they're all on the road. And you just kind of see what you get out of those.
Yeah. One is on the road at Portland, though. So that's a guaranteed win, I think.
That's true.
to underscore your point, Miami last season had 74 points from 34 games, the standard for MLS. This season in Ligue 1, PSG has 74 points from 28 games. So,
and they're like one of the best teams in the world. Like they're really, really good.
Yes, unfortunately they are, Mark, as I think we both know all too well. I think that's a good place to call it. Mark, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure when you're able to join us. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing if you are a subscriber. Thanks for listening, even if you're not a subscriber. And of course, thank you to Full Pull Wines, our dear friends Full Pull Wines, and our newest sponsor, Body Spec. This has been Nos Audietas. Jeremiah should be back next week, so you won't have to put up with as much as me. But thanks for listening. I am Aaron Campo, and we'll talk to you later.
I expect a LAFC who's motivated to prove themselves at home, to prove to their fans that they're capable of winning in this league. And it's up to us to really brew in the party. You guys like that? No? Awkward joke, dad joke right there, huh?